Everyone, thank you for clicking or tapping on this video. Today I'm going to be doing a film review, which is something I haven't done in this channel for a while. Today I'm going to be reviewing the films I've watched this November, and I've watched these films at the BFI South Bank because they had a special season called In Dreams Are Monsters, which showcased the iconic and underrated horror films that are hard to find elsewhere in the general public. So this made me like seeing them on the big screen more grateful for like cinemas such as BFI South Bank showing these classics where you don't really see them anywhere else, and obviously a mainstream cinema they will never even like show this kind of stuff because I don't know, the graphic content or like those like quite a lot of international films as well, which we're going to get to in a bit. So these three films were Vi, Inferno, and Possession. All three were amazing films that I watched for the first time. Watching them on a big screen with an audience heightened the experience, made me feel like I got more out of the films than just watching them on my phone or on a laptop. And all three of them were brilliant pieces of art. So let's get to the review. The first film I watched was a Russian film called V. This was released in 1967, directed by two Russian directors called Konstantin Yershov and Georgy Korpachev. So it was the only horror film ever made in the Soviet Union, ever. That was the tagline of the film. I don't know, that's the way they were trying to market the film. So this was actually produced by the monopoly production company called Mosfilm, which was the Soviet Union's only film production company. So obviously you had like some government officials working on this film to get their ideas onto it. I don't know how much that played into what the directors were trying to showcase, or other actors trying to get their lines into the film. So the film was about a seminary student who gets chosen to perform night prayers over a village leader's daughter. However, before that happens, we're greeted by the main character Kolma and his two friends wandering through the Soviet countryside trying to find a place to stay. As the night starts to set in, the three friends manage to come across a cottage inhabited by an old woman. This is when the film really starts to show its strengths. The contrast with the colours throughout the entire film is beautiful to watch. From the green Soviet landscape to the stone set designs, this film is a treat for the eyes, despite being labelled as a horror movie. The film is also a dark comedy, showing people within the church performing actions that don't align with what they're preaching. For example, you see here priests like trying to sniff tobacco. These guys are drinking alcohol. They're priests, but like, come on, like they're not full-time priests, if you know what I mean. I found like that was quite funny because the film, like, even though it was labeled as a horror movie, it used like dark humor to transition through scenes, which were, for example, you can't have tension 24/7 during a film. So Vi, what it did was trying to use like dark humor to like set aside and break up the tension between the scary scenes. Well, they were labeled as scary scenes, but I didn't get scared of the film, honestly. I can recall more times people laughing than like generally getting scared. Another thing I liked about Vi's dark humor was that it was in a natural and consistent way. It wasn't like inconsistent, where okay, like it just breaks the tension like to the point where it wasn't really needed of comedy. For example, uh, yeah. If you saw what's on the screen, yeah, that's an example of a film that's trying to be serious, but they use comedy at the wrong moments. So yeah, Vi, I feel like it didn't have that problem. The comedy was used when it should have been, and obviously when it had to be serious, it was serious. The film was marketed as a horror movie, but honestly, I was more like chuckling in the audience rather than like wow, squinting, like being a bit you know showed up. But honestly, I had a good time watching the film. Honestly. Another thing that this film was doing was using special effects. You see this a lot in the final scene of the film. I believe this film was made to try show off the Soviet Union's special effects rather than to try scare people. The best scenes of the movie, as I said before, was the night prayer scenes. This is like towards the second half of the film, where you can really see the filmmakers trying to show their best what type of special effects they can conjure up. This film's story is perhaps its weakest point. I feel like that the characters are not really developing. They're kind of the same how they were in the beginning and even towards the end. And the scene with Coma and the witch near the beginning of the film is quite dated. The special effects I feel like wasn't very good in that scene. But then again, the film was made in 1967. But the ending scene, I feel like the special effects were really, really good in that time. Even for 1967, like even then, even now in 2022, I feel like I was like impressed from what I saw. I personally don't have a problem with it not being scary, as I don't watch films for that reason. But I feel like if you want to like get a thrill out of a movie, I don't think Vi is the one for you. But if you want to have a good time watching films, I recommend Vi. Overall, I'd give the film a 7 out of 10. It's only 78 minutes. It's a short watch, but I feel like the main strong points of this film are the stunning colors and the funny characters which carry the film. Next film I saw was Inferno, directed by Dario Argento in 1980. This was my first Argento film, and boy, it was a good one. I actually didn't know that Inferno was the second out of a trilogy. It's called the Three Mothers trilogy. All three of films are directed by Dario Argento. Uh, I never knew this before going in, so I should have watched Surpresa, which is the first of the trilogy, before watching Inferno. But I like to watch films without basically any information beforehand because I feel like the less I know, the better the experience is watching the film. The film starts off with a woman who's interested in a collection of poems called Surpresa de Profundis. After reading the book, she is then inspired to talk with. Sorry, as I was saying, after reading the book, she is then inspired with what she has read and tries to find the keys that the books are talking about. So the book mentions three keys, and they're all scattered in different places. So what she then does is talks to the local shopkeeper who sold her this book, and the shopkeeper doesn't basically offer any help. So this leads her to take matters into her own hands. So she goes to explore around her apartment block, and then she finds a cellar underneath the shop that she got the book from. And this takes us like on a journey of suspense and tension in which we watch our protagonist in her own through a basement, not knowing who else may be there. And this really gives us like an eerie atmosphere, and like always like we're on our heels here, just trying to see that, okay, is she gonna survive? Is she not? Or is there someone behind her? Or what's gonna happen if someone's gonna pop up or anything? And I feel like Inferno was really, really good at this. The film is consistent in carrying out these scenes where you'll see these characters navigate through apartment buildings, libraries, and shops by themselves, not knowing what will happen next. The use of the eerie sound and creepy lighting in these scenes exemplifies the impact of what Inferno gives to us. The locations in New York and Rome both give us great story arcs with different characters all going through the paranoia of being hunted by someone or something that we can't physically see ourselves. The only negatives I think about when I the only negatives when I think about watching Inferno was the dubbing was very awkward. I'm not gonna lie, it was off, and like there was people in the audience who were actually laughing over this, and just it was a bit cringe. But personally, I didn't really affect it. It didn't really affect me too much. But there was times where, for example, you had just a very very tense scene, and then you see these guys like they're just talking funny and everything, and just like, oh, it's over now. Hey, mommy, it's over. Leave me a comment if you know what that is. If you know what that's from. This respect. Anyway, so overall, I'd give Inferno an 8 out of 10. This film is a slasher fest that it'll get you to squint your eyes, shake your head, and maybe even shout at the screen if you're not watching it in public with the chase scenes that Inferno's characters are going through. So yeah, if you really like giallos or slasher films or films where you're just like you're always watching and like hoping, oh, what's gonna happen next? Inferno, I really recommend it. Now, last but not least, the last film I watched in November was the most controversial one. It's a film called Possession, made in 1981 by Andrzej Zulawski. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Before watching the film, I've heard about how the film is a tough watch and it's quite disturbing. But as someone who's watched a lot of anime and films with disturbing scenes, I believe that I was ready to watch Possession. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that the best way to go watching a film is knowing as little as possible, and I believe that is the best way to experience a film like Possession. Possession is unlike anything I've ever seen. It doesn't play by any rules in terms of genre, structure, and the limits where the actors go to. The extremity of what you see in Possession is something you will never see in a Western movie. There are Asian movies nowadays that are not afraid to display such sensitive topics such as domestic abuse, mental breakdowns, and of course, TV series like they'll show graphic content, but TV series are made by different audiences, whereas films they're made for like audiences that go to the cinema with their families and everything. They have to consider the fact that if the age rating is too high, then they're limiting the amount of people who can watch the film. So, yeah, Possession doesn't really give a damn about that. Like, it just goes all out. Honestly. Uh, Another thing that Possession is quite unique in is like it's not really a certain story theme going on. Like Is it a Cold War thriller? Is it a sci-fi horror? Or is it a breakup drama? To me, Possession is all of those things, but done in a way which I've never seen before in any other movie. All of the main cast give everything in their performances, as we see their characters fall into depravity due to not being able to manage the situation and find themselves in. These characters, they're human, but they're like the deepest, you know, darkest sides of the human character that I've ever seen in film. The number one actress in this film, and the number one performance actually that I think I've probably seen in any other film in history, like this is one of the top performances in cinema history, was Isabella Gianni as Anna and Helen. She portrays a mother and a wife whose motivations are unclear. What we see is a woman who's unable to come to grips with what she has done in her life and what she's doing now recently. She lets these thoughts and actions possess her to the point where she becomes nothing like her true self. As the film continues on, giving off surreal scenes that show how broken someone can become in a toxic relationship. Ajani also plays the character of Helen, the teacher of the child. Helen is used as an opposite to Anna in the fact that she's portrayed as a nuclear type mother who's always there for her child and doesn't disappear without a reason, to who slowly becomes more important as the film carries on. The locations in Berlin, Germany, and also Poland. I don't know which city in Poland, but I recognize the Polish writing during the scenes, displaying the post-war communist buildings, adding to the static undertone that the outside world that Possession is set in is quite depressing. There are almost no scenes that showcase life outside the personal lives of the characters, which correlates with the sad undertone of the story as we witnessed during these 2 hours. Honestly, after watching this film, you're going to be drained, even if you like experience with films like Possession. Another similarity with Inferno are the abrupt ending styles between like it's not really giving the viewer a rest. The music as well is quite similar. The use of music, not like the soundtrack, but the music is like very eerie and honestly, like it doesn't. It's not something you'd listen to, like for example, when you're doing work, like I don't know, like a Ennio Morricone or even like a what's that guy's name? The even someone like Bernard Herrmann. The composer of Psycho. Like his music is quite cool as well. But this music, like honestly, it's not cool. I don't think it was made for like recreational activity. I'd give Possession a 10 out of 10. It is unlike anything I've ever seen, and made me want to learn more about how such a work of art even came to be in the first place. There were scenes that made me feel like there was no scenes where I felt like I didn't want to watch anymore. This was including the famous subway scene. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's basically a scene where uh, Isabella Johnny, Isabella Johnny's character, she has like a nervous breakdown, and it's like it goes on for like 5 minutes of just it's just a scene with her, and she just has a nervous breakdown, and it's no one's going to help her, and then like it's just her like I'm not gonna spoil it. In this scene, I felt like I appreciated Ajani's acting skills rather than, for example, like in awe of like, oh, what am I watching? Because that scene, like, I can't imagine like what an actress would go through like when making that scene. However, without giving spoilers, the scenes where Anna and her husband are Mark obviously arguing with one another, I did find that sometimes to be a bit of a drag and a bit like tough, like a bit and it draining my energy because, for example, I don't know if you've like experienced something like that in your life, and that could be a bit draining. Like, oh, I can't believe I'm watching this again, and like that might trigger like PTSD. But other than that, like the way it's a yeah, there are like disturbing scenes, but I never felt like oh, I don't want to watch it anymore. Possession doesn't have a lot of recent home media releases, so trying to find a copy of the film on Blu-ray and DVD is it's going to cost you. I feel like if you just look on Amazon at the prices, yeah, they're quite high. However, if you look out for this film, try look it out in your local art house cinema. And if I could recommend just one film out of the three films I watched this month, it would have to be Possession. The In Dreams and Monsters season at BFI South Bank will be continuing in December, and I plan on watching a few more films that capture my interest. I recommend all three of these films as they're films that will offer you something different to what the cinemas usually put out nowadays. Thanks for watching and see you next time.